Hi, my name is Phil. I like to talk about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the latest lies regarding a so-called Brexit dividend, how it is hopelessly wrong, and how it should ultimately be futile. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, patrons with this weekend drawing my attention to a piece in various media, including a Russian propaganda site, which were claiming tens of billions of pounds in savings coming as a result of Brexit. It was even supposedly referencing a government report. Now, this seemed a little odd to me at the time because I know the latest government report calculates that our Brexit dividend is actually a loss of £2 billion a week as a result of this. There hasn't been an updated calculation because Boris Johnson has specifically refused to order the civil service to carry one out for fear of that assessment coming out either just as bad or even worse potentially. Now, it turns out that the report that they were referencing wasn't a report at all, but the government's latest budget document. And from this, the likes of the Daily Mail in this country seem to think we'll be saving a total of £42.3 billion over 5 years. Now, that's an average of £8.5 billion a year. I mean, without even considering other effects, when we consider that the latest estimates show that the UK is going to lose up to 14% of its trade in exports with the EU. I mean, that's 40.5 billion straight away. And that's for 1 year. That's a yearly thing, not a 5-yearly thing. So just considering that one thing as a result of tariffs and friction to trade, the loss of £40.5 billion in trade a year, as opposed to so-called saving £8.5 billion, I mean, that knocks it into a cocked hat. So per year, the UK would lose as much in exports to the EU as the Daily Fail thinks we're going to be saving in 5 years. Straight away, it's looking a bit stupid. But it doesn't end there. So looking at exactly why they think we'll be saving over £40 billion, looking at the figures in this document, it's essentially taken exclusively from savings in the EU membership fees and customs duties retained on goods coming into the UK. So the membership fees, to a certain extent, would technically be an actual saving. However, billions of those fees are used to subsidise things in this country. They come back. You know, they subsidise farming, we know about, social projects, research projects. Now, we already know that the government are going to phase out the subsidies for farmers at least. They've already announced that. But are they suggesting that the government are not going to fund the social projects and the research projects that the EU currently funds? I mean, I believe that. I absolutely believe that. But that's not what the government are claiming as far as I can tell. They say they are going to fund research at least. But let's say the government do indeed pull the plug on that funding, which would have an economic cost in itself, lowering the real savings that they're calculating. But there's still more. So it also assumes we'll be carrying on trading in exactly the same quantities as we do now. But our goods are about to become more expensive. Not only will we be paying customs duties on raw materials coming in and parts coming in that we need to manufacture products to then export. Depending on how the government decides to approach tariffs, I mean, Theresa May was talking about reducing tariffs to zero on quite a lot of stuff, just unilaterally. Boris Johnson's talked about not doing that. Whatever they decide to do, there'll be some customs duties there or not, but there will definitely be customs duties on the exports going out, which, remember, is how we make money as a country. We have to export. Import is us paying money. Exporting is how we'd make it. So those products are going to cost more. That means that customers outside the UK will potentially be looking elsewhere for their purchases, hence the to 14% loss in exports just to the EU. Doesn't cover the rest of the world. And remember, we do have trade arrangements with the rest of the world that are about to worsen as well. A lot of people focus on our trade with the EU, our membership of the EU, and our membership at the moment of the transition period of the EU grant us better trade conditions with lots of other economies around the world, including the United States, than we are about to experience after the transition period ends. So the actual amount of lost exports will exceed that. But we'll focus on the EU because they're just trying to talk about trade with the EU. That's fine. I'm okay with that. So it's not also just about the tariffs that will be on the things making them more expensive. The fact that there will be a lot of delay at the borders means that we won't be able to transport goods anything like as quickly as well. So being able to supply customers in the EU in time, the just-in-time supply chain, we won't really be able to engage in that because people will be asking for something to deliver the next day or within 2 days, and we'll be saying, well, it might take about 28 days or even 2 weeks. No, no. We'll also lose business from Irish freight. So at the moment, what would happen is if goods are being transported from Ireland to, say, the Netherlands, they just cut across England and Wales. Now, given that that would mean 2 sets of border delays after we leave the transition period, Ireland has been planning other routes for a while now. They're not as good as now, but they are better than having to go through 2 sets of border delays. So all those Irish lorries buying fuel and pork pies along the way will no longer be happening. And even the government's best current hopes, to deal with these border delays is we'll have systems in place in 2025. That's their best estimate. By which time, of course, we'll have permanently lost even more business than we already have because we'll have gone through several years of these border delays. And that's if you believe that the government will, for the very first time, actually implement a complex new system and it works on schedule. And that'll be a first. Now, at that point, the amount we're losing in a single year would completely eclipse the amount we're saving over 5 years. It's easy to see how the government reports that we'll actually be losing 2 billion a week, not saving anything, comes into being. The maths is already embarrassingly conclusive for this so-called Brexit dividend, but it still doesn't end there. So we currently get the use of lots of regulatory bodies in the EU. Aviation safety and medical bodies have been particularly newsworthy in the last week, but it also goes into like security, food safety, environment, patents, banking, fisheries. The list goes on in terms of the regulatory bodies that the EU has that obviously at the moment we use. Boris Johnson says he's pulling us out of every single one of these. And that's Boris Johnson, mind you, not the EU. The EU has not threatened our participation in any of them, not a single one. This is entirely the decision of our government. So what that means is we have to set up our own bodies to do the same work in the UK. And we have to fund it in full, as opposed to now where we just pay a part share, because all the countries club together to fund this thing. The Aviation Safety Agency was a great example recently because we have the firm figures. So we currently pay £4 million a year to participate in the EU's version. So the British government has said that it is setting up a new one at a cost of £40 million a year. Never mind that we'll be drawing on less expertise and will, as a result, be less effective. It costs them 10 times as much is the take home from this. Now, as far as I can tell, the government haven't released comprehensive figures for how much all of the agencies that we're going to have to set up will cost. But this single example shows that a chunk of our membership fee is also being used to purchase services that will cost us much more to do it on our own. So again, they're not factoring that in. Daily Fail didn't bother to mention that. And this is why the notion back in the 2016 referendum that we'll save billions in membership fees, they just said, oh, we pay this in membership fees. They actually used an inflated figure as well, not the real figure, but it doesn't matter. Just the general concept of, oh, this is our membership fee, we'll save, we won't pay any of that, was so ridiculous because it was completely failing to take into account of what we get in return. I have kept saying it's very much like someone giving up their job to save on the petrol money they use to transport themselves to that job. That's what it's like. It's like someone saying, I'm going to give up my job, I will save on the fuel. If you were to say that to anyone, including someone who voted leave, they'd just think you were stupid. And yet that's what people have believed. And, it's also a pointless lie as well. Finally, I'll just say, I cannot understand what the purpose is of still doing this. This was just a few days ago that this was coming out again. And you think, why? I could understand the lie in the referendum campaign. I could maybe even understand perpetuating the lie in the last few years when we were still members of the EU. We are no longer members of the EU. What's the point of keeping up this lie? At the end of the day, at the end of this year, Boris Johnson is if he does what he says he's going to do, he's going to take us out of the transition period. But whether he does or he doesn't, we no longer have a democratic means of determining what Boris Johnson does. None at all. The next time we will be in several years' time, by which time, whatever he's going to do, he will have done. And we will have the real economic figures for it. I really don't understand the point of this line anymore. It doesn't matter how much of the population believe one thing or another at this point. Nothing anyone can do about it. We will have the figures, the real figures, not estimates, by the time we're going to the polls again. But anyway, that's the situation. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.